Okay, Bo, I need your opinion here on what you think. First off, let me tell you, I'm going to take these shorter screws here out that came with this frame, and I'm going to install these that came with the ESC in there. They're just a little bit longer, and I'm going to install the O-rings like I've got on here now that came with the ESC. There's 4 little black O-rings. You install those over the bolt, and then when you put the ESC and flight controller on, it gives you just a little bit more room in here, clearance room in here to run wires through. And I know that when you put your 03 back here or whatever, you're going to have camera wires that's got to go up and through to there. So that'll help that. Now the next thing is, you said you wanted the VTX plug facing back this way toward the 03, if I understood you right. And according to this flight controller here, this 4-pin plug right here is the VTX plug, if I'm looking at it right. So you just flip that over and push it down, and that flight controller and ESC is the right way. That's the way it should be mounted in a quad, without having to change anything in Betaflight. So that's the right direction for everything. Now the next thing, you have 2 options here, brother. I've looked it over and studied it for a good hour here. You don't have a great option, but you have 2 options. The first option is, we can take this tiny capacitor and put it right in that groove right there and let it lay down flat. Okay. Put the flight controller and ESC back over it. Now I don't know, we would have to heat shrink it so it don't short nothing out. So that's going to take up a little more space, but I still think it would go in that hole. So then we put this down over it. You could bend those wires up then. You could bend those wires up, and you could solder them to this, to the ESC. But to do that, the way you wanted to do it was bring your hot and ground wire straight up and straight over to here. That's not going to work, brother. For one thing, that's going to be in the way of all the plug-ins here on the flight controller, between your flight controller and 03 unit. Having the wires up like this is going to be in the way. The way this thing, I'm pretty sure, is made to work is you're supposed to run your wires down through this hole here and back up through this hole here and solder it to the XT60. Now we can do that with this capacitor in its place right here, but we have to use these tiny wires, these 14 gauge wires. And although I know that would work, and Bardwell says that the bigger you go on your battery with the more voltage, the smaller your wires can be, and I run these on 4S on my aluminum quad without any problem, I still don't trust it. I did that because I had to. This is a case where you can, but you don't have to. Now if we ran the 12 gauge wire, then this ESC won't work here, because you cannot get the wire down through past the ESC. There's not enough room. Not both of them. You can't get both wires through there. So if you want to put the capacitor here, then you have to use the smaller wires. But I don't like this idea. For one reason, I don't like it because we're using smaller wire and we're using too small of a capacitor. The capacitor that came with this ESC is this 1000 UF 35 volt capacitor. It's twice the size of the other one. This is what came with the ESC. This is what it needs to have. Now myself, I don't run a capacitor on most of my quads most of the time, and don't usually have any trouble. I've tried it with and without and can't tell much difference, but I run a 4S, and you don't really need a capacitor when you're running that small of voltage. 6S, so I believe you probably would need it. So your only other option is to put the flight controller and ESC on like this. Use the bigger 12 gauge wire. If the capacitor's not in the way, the 12 gauge wire will go right down through there. and they'll solder onto here. They'll go down, make an L, go underneath all this carbon in between those two grooves underneath there, and come back up through this hole and solder to there. That'll be clean. That'll leave all this open right in here between the flight controller and the O3 for your wires. You'll have plenty of room underneath the ESC to run your cable up to your camera. Now, the only place to put the capacitor is going to be up front. So let's take a look here. It's not ideal to move your capacitor away from. You're supposed to put your capacitor either right at the battery lead, somewhere along the wire, your main hot wire and ground wire, or right at the ESC. But a lot of times you just can't do that. And this is one of those cases, brother. You just can't do it if you're going to do it this way. Now, this would be option 2, is to run the big wires like I said, put the ESC up front. We could either stand it up like this, or probably lay it down flat. Looks like there's lots of room up here in the front. And we'll just connect 2 little wires. The wires will only be about that long, just a couple inches, just long enough to reach under the flight controller and bend straight up and hook to the pads. That would be your best option. Now, running your capacitor away from your the place you're supposed to have it does make a little difference, but from what I understand, it doesn't make enough of a difference that that it's going to hurt anything. It's still going to give plenty of filtration. So it's up to you, brother, whether you want option 1 or 2. Option 1, we'll use the smaller wires and the smaller capacitor. Option 2, we'll use the big wires and we'll use the big capacitor, and we'll just move the capacitor up front. Another thing was, I wasn't sure if you had anything you was going to put up here in front. I was looking. I believe there's plenty of room though. Like I don't know if you're going to run a lost model alarm. Even if you do though, I think there's plenty of room for the capacitor and the lost model alarm up front here along with the camera. So just tell me which direction you want me to go, brother, and I'll so I can get started on it.